He did not shout speeches nor lead armies. His weapon was not a rifle but a pen. He organized death from his desk with train schedules and lists of names. He was the master of deportation, the engineer of the final solution, the man who turned genocide into an administrative procedure. Behind his glasses and his grey office worker appearance hid the architect of extermination. It was he who perfected the machinery of death, who turned the Holocaust into a macabre clockwork system. Timetables, wagons, and quotas of elimination. He was the bureaucrat of hell, the manager of genocide. With the pen as a knife, with each signature he sent thousands to concentration camps. He did not shout, he did not get his hands dirty, he only obeyed. He supposedly only followed orders. His name was Adolf Eichmann. The brutal escape of Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann was born on the 19th of March of 1906 in Solingen, Germany. Otto Adolf Eichmann grew up in a Protestant middle-class family. After his mother's death, the family moved to Linz, Austria, where Eichmann completed his secondary education, although he never excelled academically nor showed any special interest in politics or philosophy. After a youth without major accomplishments, he joined the Austrian Nazi Party in 1932 and shortly thereafter the SS, a decision that would define the course of his life. His career took off when he was assigned to the Jewish Affairs Office of the Sicherheitsdienst, SD, the SS intelligence service. Thanks to his diligence, coldness, and organizational skills, he quickly rose through the Nazi ranks. During Hitler's rise to power, Eichmann was commissioned to design the first plans for the forced emigration of Jews from the Reich. Later, his task evolved from emigration to extermination. He was appointed head of Section 4B4 of the Reich Security Main Office, RSHA, responsible for Jewish affairs. From this position, he played a key role in the logistical implementation of the Holocaust. His true notoriety emerged in 1942, after the Wannsee Conference, where high-ranking Nazi officials defined the practical mechanisms for carrying out the final solution to the Jewish question: the systematic genocide of European Jews. Eichmann was not only present at this meeting, but he was also the one who designed and managed the complex network of train deportations to extermination camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, and others. He thus became the essential cog in the genocidal system, the man who precisely organized the death train's schedules. He did not act with his own hands, but he facilitated the means to do so. His role was that of the efficient extermination bureaucrat, one who followed orders without questioning them, without showing emotion or remorse. Hannah Arendt, during her famous coverage of Eichmann's trial in Jerusalem, described him as the example of the banality of evil, an ordinary man lacking visible fanaticism who executed monstrous acts from behind a desk. At the end of the Second World War, Adolf Eichmann knew he did not have much time left and that he would soon be captured. Ultimately, this could not be avoided. Under the name Adolf Barth, and with the supposed rank of senior corporal in the Luftwaffe, he was taken as a prisoner of war by the United States. However, due to his blood-type tattoo, which clearly identified him as a member of the SS, he soon referred to himself as SS Untersturmführer Otto Eichmann. He was interned at the Oberdachstetten prisoner camp. After revealing his true identity to some of his fellow prisoners, in January of 1946 he received a letter of recommendation from former SS officer Hans Freisleben, which allowed him to hide in the small village of Altensalzkot in the Lüneburg lowlands. In February, Eichmann escaped from the camp and, with the help of old contacts, reached this new refuge via Hamburg. Along the way, he obtained false documents identifying him as a merchant, Otto Henninger from Prien, born in Breslau. Under this name, he secured a job as a lumberjack and forest worker at the Kohlenbach Monastery's forestry office. However, during the Nuremberg trials, Dieter Wiesliceny and Rudolf Höss, among others, revealed Eichmann's existence to the Allies, providing damning evidence in their testimonies. Eichmann, using the false identity of Otto Henninger, was not unaware of these events and assumed he would soon be captured. In the turbulent international landscape of the post-war era, Adolf Eichmann glimpsed one last window of escape. The powers that had once led the hunt for war criminals were beginning to shift their focus to new threats. The British had largely abandoned the active pursuit of fugitive Nazis, while the Americans were directing all their efforts toward containing Soviet expansion and managing the growing tension in a divided Berlin. This strategic reorientation granted Eichmann an unexpected reprieve. The false identity document he had obtained months earlier, thanks to the help of former SS comrades, was nearing expiration. Remaining on German soil, where surveillance still persisted in certain circles, was becoming increasingly dangerous. Staying was too risky a gamble. The clandestine escape network he had contacted in the city of Celle offered him a solution, a carefully designed escape route, though not without its dangers. Before disappearing, Eichmann left behind a false trail in hopes of diverting suspicion. He told his landlady, a woman who knew him as a polite, punctual and reserved tenant, that he planned to travel to Scandinavia, intending to use his knowledge in mechanical engineering there. She, who had never suspected anything dark about his conduct, believed his story without question, but his real destination was elsewhere. Still under the fictitious name of Otto Henninger, Eichmann took a train bound for Munich. From there he headed to a small town near the Bavarian border. Every kilometer traveled brought him closer to freedom, but also increased the risk of being identified. Nevertheless, he trusted blindly in the precision of every step of his itinerary, which had been meticulously prepared by a contact named Gunther, a key member of the clandestine network. The journey was not cheap. Eichmann had invested much of his personal resources in acquiring forged documents, paying intermediaries, and securing his route. The first major obstacle in his escape appeared when it was time to cross into Austria. The border village where he was supposed to meet his guide was patrolled by soldiers and police, and the atmosphere was tense. When checking into the small local hotel, his nerves betrayed his facade. He could barely hold the pen as he signed the guest book. The plan was starting to falter. His guide, the key person to cross undetected, did not appear at the agreed point. Later, Eichmann learned that the man had been urgently admitted to a hospital. At that moment, the fugitive realized that luck could abandon him at any instant, that the network, no matter how well structured, was vulnerable to the unpredictability of chance. After remaining in hiding for a week, Eichmann finally received the news that would mark the next step in his escape. One of the members of the network protecting him had managed to strike a deal with a local hunter who would guide him along little-used routes through the Alps. Without delay, Eichmann slung his suitcase over his shoulder, one of the few belongings he still had, and together with his guide began a strenuous crossing of the German-Austrian border via steep mountain paths, under harsh weather conditions and the constant danger of being discovered. The first stop on the journey was a solitary wooden cabin located high on a hill, hidden among the fog and dense forests. There, warmed by a stove and with a cup of coffee in hand, Eichmann had a bitter realization. He would probably never again set foot on German soil. The war was over, but his life as a citizen of the Third Reich had ended forever. At dawn the next day, while sharing a frugal breakfast, the hunter spotted a figure in the distance approaching along the same path they had taken. It was a border guard. Facing imminent risk, Eichmann quickly hid inside an old, dusty wardrobe pressed against the wood, his face flushed and barely able to suppress the urge to sneeze. From his hiding place, he listened closely to every word of the brief exchange between the hunter and the guard. The conversation was trivial, just a few phrases about the weather and the roads, until the visitor said goodbye and continued on his way. Only then did Eichmann emerge from the wardrobe, relieved, and they resumed their journey. After crossing the rest of the mountainous terrain without incident, they descended until reaching Kufstein in the heart of Austria. There they took refuge for a few days in a modest inn. The innkeeper, aware of the risks, observed every movement of his guests. Only when he deemed it safe to continue did he allow Eichmann to proceed, though with one condition: he had to leave his suitcase behind. The innkeeper feared the luggage's appearance would attract too much attention and alert the authorities. Already on Italian soil on the outskirts of the city of Bolzano, a priest dressed in black awaited him on a bicycle. He had meticulously transported Eichmann's suitcase via a different route, managing to get it across without issue. With his spiritual guide leading the way, Eichmann was able to reach Murano, an elegant villa nestled in the South Tyrol region, where Italian and German cultures intertwined. It was there that, after toasting with a glass of wine to celebrate his arrival, he spent the night in an old castle used by the escape network as a temporary refuge for other Nazi fugitives. The next day, he received his first identity document under a new persona. The municipal authorities, either complicit or uninformed, issued a legal paper with a new name, Ricardo Klement. From that moment on, Adolf Eichmann officially ceased to exist. Everything was coldly calculated. From that region in northern Italy, he would begin his journey to South America, aided by a vast protection network composed of clergy, civil officials, and intelligence agents. The final destination was Buenos Aires, and the political context played in his favor. On the other side of the Atlantic, an even more complex network had already been activated. At the center of that protection machinery was the then president of Argentina, Juan Domingo Perón. His role was crucial for Eichmann and hundreds of other fugitives from the Nazi regime to find asylum in the South American country. In February of 1945, when the defeat of the Third Reich was only a matter of time, Perón secretly summoned the most influential leaders of the German community residing in Argentina. Although a few months later the country would formally declare war on Germany, that maneuver was merely symbolic, a gesture to curry favor with the Allies at the end of the conflict. In practice, Argentina had for years served as a key point for Nazi intelligence in Latin America. Perón, deeply influenced by his nationalist formation and his years as a military attaché in Rome, where he developed a strong admiration for Mussolini's fascism, never hid his sympathies for the Axis. Long before assuming the presidency through popular vote, he had already consolidated his power after a military coup. Once in government, he saw in the immigration of Nazi exiles a double opportunity. On one hand, to incorporate scientists, technicians, and engineers who could contribute to Argentina's industrial and military development. On the other, to reaffirm his anti-communist ideology by sheltering those who had fought Bolshevism, regardless of the crimes they had committed during the war. Thus, while restricting Jewish immigration and imposing bureaucratic hurdles on Holocaust refugees, Perón offered asylum and state protection to Nazi war criminals. To carry out these operations, he delegated the task to Rodolfo Freude, director of Argentine intelligence services and son of a prominent German businessman with Nazi connections. Freude was the logistical mastermind behind this covert operation. He handled secret funds, coordinated bribes, managed forged documents, and organized escape routes. His role was that of the efficient extermination bureaucrat, one who followed orders without questioning them, without showing emotion or remorse. Hannah Arendt, during her famous coverage of Eichmann's trial in Jerusalem, described him as the example of the banality of evil, an ordinary man lacking visible fanaticism who executed monstrous acts from behind a desk. At the end of the Second World War, Adolf Eichmann knew he did not have much time left and that he would soon be captured. Ultimately, this could not be avoided. Under the name Adolf Barth, and with the supposed rank of senior corporal in the Luftwaffe, he was taken as a prisoner of war by the United States. However, due to his blood-type tattoo, which clearly identified him as a member of the SS, he soon referred to himself as SS Untersturmführer Otto Eckmann. He was interned at the Oberdachstetten prisoner camp. After revealing his true identity to some of his fellow prisoners, in January of 1946 he received a letter of recommendation from former SS officer Hans Freisleben, which allowed him to hide in the small village of Altensalzkot in the Lüneburg lowlands. In February, Eichmann escaped from the camp and, with the help of old contacts, reached this new refuge via Hamburg. Along the way, he obtained false documents identifying him as a merchant, Otto Henninger from Prien, born in Breslau. Under this name, he secured a job as a lumberjack and forest worker at the Kohlenbach Monastery's forestry office. However, during the Nuremberg trials, Dieter Wisliceny and Rudolf Höss, among others, revealed Eichmann's existence to the Allies, providing damning evidence in their testimonies. Eichmann, using the false identity of Otto Henninger, was not unaware of these events and assumed he would soon be captured. In the turbulent international landscape of the post-war era, Adolf Eichmann glimpsed one last window of escape. The powers that had once led the hunt for war criminals were beginning to shift their focus to new threats. The British had largely abandoned the active pursuit of fugitive Nazis, while the Americans were directing all their efforts toward containing Soviet expansion and managing the growing tension in a divided Berlin. This strategic reorientation granted Eichmann an unexpected reprieve. The false identity document he had obtained months earlier, thanks to the help of former SS comrades, was nearing expiration. Remaining on German soil, where surveillance still persisted in certain circles, was becoming increasingly dangerous. Staying was too risky a gamble. The clandestine escape network he had contacted in the city of Celle offered him a solution, a carefully designed escape route, though not without its dangers. Before disappearing, Eichmann left behind a false trail in hopes of diverting suspicion. He told his landlady, a woman who knew him as a polite, punctual and reserved tenant, that he planned to travel to Scandinavia, intending to use his knowledge in mechanical engineering there. She, who had never suspected anything dark about his conduct, believed his story without question, but his real destination was elsewhere. Still under the fictitious name of Otto Henninger, Eichmann took a train bound for Munich. From there, he headed to a small town near the Bavarian border. Every kilometer traveled brought him closer to freedom, but also increased the risk of being identified. Nevertheless, he trusted blindly in the precision of every step of his itinerary, which had been meticulously prepared by a contact named Gunther, a key member of the clandestine network. The journey was not cheap. Eichmann had invested much of his personal resources in acquiring forged documents, paying intermediaries, and securing his route. The first major obstacle in his escape appeared when it was time to cross into Austria. The border village where he was supposed to meet his guide was patrolled by soldiers and police, and the atmosphere was tense. When checking into the small local hotel, his nerves betrayed his facade. He could barely hold the pen as he signed the guest book. The plan was starting to falter. His guide, the key person to cross undetected, did not appear at the agreed point. Later, Eichmann learned that the man had been urgently admitted to a hospital. At that moment, the fugitive realized that luck could abandon him at any instant, that the network, no matter how well structured, was vulnerable to the unpredictability of chance. After remaining in hiding for a week, Eichmann finally received the news that would mark the next step in his escape. One of the members of the network protecting him had managed to strike a deal with a local hunter who would guide him along little-used routes through the Alps. Without delay, on the 17th of July of 1950, the steamer Giovan C. set sail from the port of Genoa and, after weeks of travel, navigated the murky waters of the Rio de la Plata toward the port of Buenos Aires. Eichmann, carrying a simple suitcase with all his belongings, joined the line of immigrants waiting at the entry terminal. As he slowly advanced, he mentally reviewed the details of his new life. He had to remember that his name was Ricardo Klement, born in Bolzano, profession mechanic, Catholic religion, and that his initial lodging would be the Hotel Buenos Aires. But that effort proved unnecessary. No one questioned him. When his turn came, the immigration officer barely glanced at his passport, stamped it, and let him pass. Eichmann had officially entered Argentina. At the port exit, he was awaited by Carlos Fuldner, his former SS comrade and current operations manager of the escape network on Argentine soil. It was he who took him to a modest apartment in the Florida neighborhood, on the outskirts of the capital. and introduced him to other German fugitives living under new identities. There, Eichmann became just one more among dozens, perhaps hundreds, of exiles from Nazism, Italian fascism, the Spanish Phalange, the Vichy regime, and other defeated dictatorships in Europe. Thanks to Fuldner, Eichmann found work in a mechanical workshop where, with discretion and efficiency, he went unnoticed. Shortly after, he succeeded in having his Argentine identity document issued. By October of 1956, Ricardo Klement was already a legal citizen of the country. At the end of that same year, he took a new step toward normalcy. He was hired as an engineer at the state company Capri, dedicated to the construction of dams and hydroelectric infrastructure in the province of Tucumán. He had a steady income and maintained an extremely low profile. Even among his German colleagues, he never mentioned his past. He avoided it entirely. After more than 2 years of emotional isolation, Eichmann decided to reunite with his family. From the riverbank, while drinking mate in solitude, he waited for news. Finally, his wife Vera and their children boarded the ship Salta at the port of Genoa in the midst of a heavy storm. The voyage coincided with the death of Eva Perón, whose mourning still cast a shadow of sadness over Argentina. Cautious as always, Eichmann avoided meeting them personally. Instead, he sent 2 trusted friends. When he finally reunited with the children, he did not reveal the truth immediately. He introduced himself as Uncle Ricardo, leaving the story half told. Once in Tucumán, after settling into a modest home, Eichmann broke the silence and confessed his true identity. He imposed strict rules of discretion. They could not speak of the past, neither inside nor outside the home. The children, confused, began calling him Der Alte, the old man, as a way to distance the weight of the name Eichmann from daily life. Vera, his wife, found spiritual refuge in the daily reading of the Bible, seeking comfort in the constant tension of their double life. For the first time since the fall of the Reich, they were together as a family. But they were so in the shadows of the world, in a hidden corner of the map, protected by silence, lies, and oblivion. Nevertheless, Adolf Eichmann's disappearance did not occur in total silence. Even though the fog of time and distance tried to cover his tracks, traces remained in Europe, and some men were unwilling to let the case fade into oblivion. In Austria, the tireless Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal followed leads with relentless determination. He had focused his attention on Vera Eichmann, the fugitive's wife, convinced that sooner or later she would lead him to her husband. When he finally located the house that had been their family residence, it was already empty. The Eichmanns had left. Neighbors, discreetly questioned, confirmed they had departed suddenly without explanation. Some relatives, evasive, eventually admitted they no longer lived there. For Wiesenthal, this was more than a clue. It was confirmation that Eichmann was still alive and had managed to escape. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away, in the deceptive calm of Greater Buenos Aires, the Eichmann family lived a grey, meticulously planned routine. In December of 1956, Klaus Eichmann, the eldest son of the Nazi official, now going by the name Nick, made the first mistake that would jeopardize the entire clandestine structure his father had built over years. It happened during a visit to the home of his girlfriend Sylvia Hermann in the neighborhood of Olivos, an area with a strong German immigrant presence. The family dinner was proceeding with a degree of formality when, without much thought, Klaus expressed a terrible and revealing opinion. He stated that the Germans had made no mistake in persecuting the Jews, but rather that their real failure was not completing the extermination. He said it coldly, as if voicing an unquestionable truth. The phrase dropped like a stone in the middle of the dining room. One of those present, Lothar Hermann, Sylvia's father, blind, silent, and seemingly indifferent, did not react immediately. No one at the table knew that Lothar was Jewish, nor that he had been a prisoner at Dachau concentration camp. His face showed no emotion, but inside, every word Klaus had spoken etched itself with surgical precision. He said nothing, did not interrupt the conversation, did not alert anyone. He did what so many had done to survive the war. He listened, memorized, and waited. By that time, Adolf Eichmann had been living in Argentina under a false identity for 6 years. Ricardo Klement, mechanical technician. His life was marked by strict routine and inflexible rules, which he also imposed on his family. He had taught his sons to lie naturally, to distrust everyone, and never to mention any details of the past. Visits were supervised, conversations filtered. The fear of being discovered made him paranoid. Every gesture, every phrase, every glance could be a threat. Despite this caution, Eichmann maintained regular meetings with Wilhelm Sassen, a former SS officer who now worked as a journalist in Buenos Aires. Every Sunday, he took a bus to the neighborhood of Florida, where Sassen awaited him in a discreet house with a tape recorder on the table. Sassen's intention was to document the memories of the man who had been a key figure in the machinery of the final solution. Eichmann, trusting, spoke without filters. The sessions were long, his tone grave and measured. He showed no remorse. On the contrary, he stated without shame that if they had exterminated 10 million Jews, he would have been satisfied. He considered himself a disciplined executor, just another cog in the Nazi apparatus. His responsibility, he claimed, was not to kill with his own hands, but to ensure that the trains arrived on time, that the enemies of the Reich were led without delay to their fate. He boasted about the perfect operation of the railway routes sending prisoners from Amsterdam. For him, every operation was a matter of technical efficiency, not morality. Eichmann's daily life, however, was far removed from what it once was as a powerful bureaucrat. His house in Olivos was modest, barely furnished, and, in a cruel irony, rented from a Jewish landlord. The lease had been signed by Herbert Kuhlmann, another former SS who had successfully settled in an upscale neighborhood of the capital. Eichmann, living austerely, could not help but compare. While some of his former comrades thrived, he accumulated failures. He had tried to earn a living through various jobs, at a laundromat, a fabric store, even a chicken farm, but all those ventures ended in bankruptcy. The only stability he found was as a worker in a warehouse, an unremarkable and poorly paid job he accepted without choice. Nor did his family life offer comfort. His relationship with Vera was tense. They argued frequently, and living together had become bitter. The teenage sons were the object of his disdain. He considered them weak, lacking character. He did not want them to pursue military careers or get involved in politics. He asked only one thing of them: to go unnoticed, not to stand out, not to attract attention. One night, after an argument, he tore the Bible from Vera's hands and ripped it apart in a fury. For him, faith was a useless illusion. For her, it was her only source of solace. The children, silent witnesses to those scenes, began referring to their father not as Dad, but as Der Alte, the old man, a nickname that denoted distance and fear. Though they lived under the same roof, Eichmann was a distant, almost spectral figure, a ghost from another time trapped in an exile without redemption, whose past sins were drawing ever closer. What he could not imagine was that his son's careless comment at an innocent dinner had triggered the alarm of the one man he least expected, Lothar Hermann, and that this moment of youthful arrogance would be the crack through which the truth would finally begin to seep. The capture of Adolf Eichmann. It was in April of 1957 when a printed page ignited the spark that years of silence had failed to extinguish. In the Argentine city of Coronel Suarez, Sylvia Hermann, as she often did, read aloud to her father, Lothar. She did it with dedication, knowing his eyes could no longer see the world, though his mind remained as sharp as ever. That day, the reading took an unexpected turn. In a German newspaper, a report on a trial in Frankfurt mentioned the name Adolf Eichmann among the accused. To Sylvia, it seemed like just another piece of information. To Lothar, however, his pulse quickened. Memory, which had not abandoned him, took him back instantly to a dinner night in Olivos months earlier, when a young man named Nick Eichmann, his daughter's boyfriend, had made a chilling comment about the Jews. He also recalled that the boy had said his father had served in the German army and that they had lived in Poland. Nothing more, but now everything made sense. Lothar Hermann was not an impulsive man, but that revelation lit within him a certainty. Nick was none other than the son of the most wanted Nazi criminal in the world, and if the son was there, the father could not be far away. He understood he could not trust the Argentine authorities, many of whom were sympathetic to or directly complicit with the Nazis in hiding. So he picked up his pen and wrote a letter. It was addressed to the prosecutors in Frankfurt. The message reached the desk of Fritz Bauer, Attorney General of the state of Hesse. Bauer was no ordinary official. He was a survivor of the regime who had vowed not to rest until Nazi criminals were brought to justice. A year earlier, he had ordered the capture of Eichmann, but without solid leads. Now, for the first time, someone claimed to have seen him. He responded immediately, sending a blurry photograph of Eichmann's face along with a clear, concise instruction. The address had to be confirmed. That was when Sylvia, determined and brave, traveled to Olivos. She took the train from Coronel Suarez and after several hours arrived at a white house with a gabled roof, located on a quiet street. She knocked on the door. A robust woman with a stern appearance greeted her, Vera Eichmann. Sylvia asked for Nick, and while waiting, one of the children in the house recognized her. He asked about Nick familiarly. A few minutes later, an older man appeared with a dull expression, hunched posture, and thick glasses. Sylvia, with a firm voice, asked if he was Mr. Eichmann. He denied it without hesitation. He said he was the uncle. The atmosphere eased slightly as they chatted about trivial matters, languages, studies, life in Argentina. Shortly after, Nick appeared in the room. He seemed surprised by the visit. He asked uncomfortably who had given her the address. The older man, the same one who had denied being his father, quickly intervened, changed the subject, and said Sylvia was welcome. Before leaving, as they walked to the door, Sylvia clearly heard Nick refer to the man. "Thank you, father." That word, father, echoed powerfully. On the return train, Sylvia asked Nick why he had called him that if he was his uncle. He replied evasively that it was just a form of respect. But for Sylvia, the mask had fallen. That night, back at home, she told everything to her father. Between the two of them, there was no longer any room for doubt. That hunched, cautious man was Adolf Eichmann. Lothar wrote again, this time with more conviction, more details. The letter once again reached Fritz Bauer. On the 19th of September of 1957, in a discreet motel room between Frankfurt and Cologne, Bauer met secretly with Felix Schinar, a diplomatic representative of the Israeli government. He did not beat around the bush. With a firm voice, he confessed that Eichmann was living in Argentina, that he himself had located him, and that the German government would not lift a finger. "I cannot trust anyone here," Bauer said, "but you can catch him." That message quickly reached Jerusalem. Issa Harel, head of the Mossad, received it gravely. This was no ordinary name. Harel knew Eichmann's file in detail. He had read the Nuremberg transcripts, reviewed reports from Yad Vashem, and absorbed every note written by Simon Wiesenthal, the man who had turned Nazi hunting into a personal duty. But before acting, he needed proof. He had to be sure the source was reliable. In November, he sent agent Charles Darom to Frankfurt. Darom met with Bauer, who confirmed the accuracy of the information but refused to reveal the informant's name. He feared for Lothar Hermann's life. In January of 1958, the Mossad made its first move on Argentine soil. Agent Joel Goran settled in Buenos Aires and observed the house at Chacabuco 4261. Everything seemed normal. A simple house, a small garden, a quiet family. The report was negative, too normal, too invisible. But neither Bauer nor Harel were swayed by appearances, so Harel sent a second agent, Ephraim Hofstetter, Chief of Criminal Investigations in Tel Aviv. In February, Hofstetter traveled to Coronel Suarez under a false identity, Karl Herbert. He arrived at the Hermann household and there, face to face, met the informant. Lothar, blind but lucid, recounted everything with astonishing precision. Sylvia, at his side, clearly described the voice of the man she had met in Olivos. She said it was a harsh, dry, authoritarian voice, exactly like the one in the recordings collected by intelligence services. But tangible proof was still missing. A false name, an occupation, a photograph, or a signature. Lothar promised to obtain more. He only asked for one thing: help relocating to Buenos Aires to continue the investigation from there. Before leaving, Hofstetter made a simple but symbolic gesture. He handed over half a train ticket. He explained that the other half would serve as the password for their next contact. The hunt had just begun, and this time the hunter was not alone. With half a ticket in his pocket and an uncertain promise, Lothar Hermann and his daughter Sylvia set out on their own to finish what the Mossad had left on pause. In April of 1958, they gained access to property records in La Plata in search of a concrete lead. The land of the house in Olivos, they discovered, was registered under the name of an Austrian man named Francisco Schmidt. For Lothar, that name was a signal. Adolf Eichmann was Austrian, and that could be a new alias, a legal disguise to hide in plain sight. It wasn't proof, but it was a new lead. Through a contact at the electric company, father and daughter obtained crucial information. The meters at the residence were registered under two names. One of them was Dagoto, the other Klement. That last one they already knew. It was the alias Eichmann had been using in hiding since his arrival in Argentina. The puzzle was beginning to fit together more precisely. A former owner of the land provided unsettling details. He spoke of visible scars on the face of the new tenant and of rumors about his arrival in the country aboard a Nazi submarine in 1945. The myth cloaked Eichmann in an aura of a spectre, half legend, half reality. But Lothar was no fabulist. He wanted facts. In May, he wrote another letter to Hofstetter. In it, he confidently stated that Francisco Schmidt was the man they were looking for. He described the physical features, movements, and habits with precision, and he requested funds to continue the investigation, to travel, to observe, to listen. The letter arrived in Tel Aviv in June. Issa Harel read it carefully but with growing skepticism. The logic didn't convince him. The property owner's name didn't prove Eichmann lived there. The scars were a subjective detail. Furthermore, Hermann was starting to seem demanding, with requests that bordered on operational control. Harel, distrustful by nature, felt that the line between informant and protagonist was beginning to blur. Even so, he decided to send a new agent, Ilani, to verify the information. At the end of August, Ilani submitted his report. It was conclusive. Francisco Schmidt was indeed the legal owner of the land, but he didn't live there. There were no direct traces of Eichmann at that address. For Harel, it was the final straw. He ordered the case to be filed away and all contact with the Hermanns to be suspended. The hunt returned to silence, but others knew more than they admitted. In March of 1958, a report from the German Secret Service BND had already recorded that Adolf Eichmann was hiding in Argentina under the name Klement. It even hinted at the possibility that he was in Jerusalem, something that seemed more like a misunderstanding than a lead. Neither the BND nor the CIA did anything. Neither warned Israel. Everyone preferred to look the other way. Meanwhile, Eichmann believed he had won. At the end of 1958, he bought a remote plot of land in San Fernando, a forgotten place without running water or electricity. There, with the help of his sons, he began to dig. It wasn't just a construction. It was a refuge, a trench to disappear from the world. They dug with effort, reinforced the walls, and erected a structure of cement and fear. He wanted his hideout to withstand not only time, but also any attempt to find him. In March of 1959, he got a job at the Mercedes-Benz plant in Gonzales, Catan. The environment was ideal for him. German technicians, some also fugitives from the past. There, Eichmann could be just another man, a false name, a familiar accent, a grey routine. He believed at last that the world had forgotten him. That history had buried him along with his victims. But it was not so. While he was digging his refuge, convinced that the persecution had ended, in Haifa the spark of memory was reignited. On the 10th of October of 1959, Tuvia Friedman, a determined Nazi hunter, made an explosive statement to the press. He claimed that Eichmann was alive, hiding in Kuwait. The news caused an international stir, a wave of speculation. It was then that Friedman received a letter that stopped him cold. It was dated the 24th of October. It came from Argentina. It was signed by Lothar Hermann. The letter denied the Kuwait story. It claimed that Eichmann was alive, yes, but living near Buenos Aires under the name Ricardo Klement. It offered details, proof. It asked for discretion. Friedman did not hesitate. They sent the information to the World Jewish Congress. In December, Fritz Bauer took a plane to Israel. He carried with him a dossier. It confirmed through two independent sources that Adolf Eichmann was living in Argentina and that his name was Ricardo Klement. This time he did not go to the Mossad. He still did not trust them. Instead, he went to prosecutor Chaim Cohen, who understood the magnitude of the matter, and arranged a meeting with Issa Harel. The information, direct and raw, forced Harel to reevaluate everything. In that very meeting, he changed his position. The hunter stepped out of the shadows again. He would send his best agent, Zvi Aharoni, to Buenos Aires. On the 6th of December, Harel personally informed Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion. He did not hesitate. Eichmann had to be captured and tried publicly in Israel. The world needed to hear his voice, and it had to be in Hebrew. Meanwhile, in Germany, anti-Semitic violence was resurfacing. Graffiti, attacks, denialist speeches. The silence of the German government increased international pressure. Harel knew that time was pressing. He took drastic measures. He blocked leaks, misled allies, secured the operation. Before the Knesset, he declared that this mission would be a deadly blow to neo-Nazism. On the 1st of March of 1960, Zvi Aharoni landed in Buenos Aires with a diplomatic passport and an official cover story. He was investigating anti-Semitic acts. In his suitcase, he carried another mission, to capture the most wanted man of the century. He stored the complete file in a safe at the consulate and began moving through the city. At Chacabuco Street, number 4261, he found the house under renovation, empty and silent, but not for long. While in Europe, the Mossad was facing obstacles in its investigation, and Simon Wiesenthal was reviewing old photographs in search of matches with Eichmann's face, a decisive lead emerged on the 4th of March. An informant delivered a package addressed to a certain Nicolas Klement. A young man nicknamed Dito revealed that the family had moved to Don Torquato, though he could not specify the address. Shortly afterward, the same contact returned to the workshop with a more precise instruction. The residence was in San Fernando. It was then that Dito confronted him with a blunt certainty. "He's not Klement, he's Eichmann." That phrase was enough for Zvi Aharoni to know they were on the right track. By mid-March of 1960, Aharoni arrived in San Fernando and found a house that matched the description exactly: exposed brick, flat roof, and a low fence. From the shadows, he spotted a woman and a child, probably Vera Eichmann and her youngest son. However, that night he did not see Ricardo Klement. In Tel Aviv, Issa Harel had already ordered the operation to move forward with the necessary legal backing. Meanwhile, in New York, David Ben-Gurion was holding talks with Konrad Adenauer. Israel was seeking financial support, and West Germany wanted to strengthen diplomatic ties. On the 16th of March, Aharoni accessed official records and found the piece of information that confirmed his suspicions. The land was registered under the name Veronica Libel de Fitman, a name that left no doubt about her true identity. It was an alias of Vera Eichmann. Inside the house, the family was beginning to suspect that something was wrong. Eichmann had read rumors about his alleged presence in Kuwait, without imagining that a simple gift sent under the name Nick Klement would be the trigger for his downfall. With the property identified, Aharoni returned to San Fernando. This time, he saw the man in person. His face was unmistakable. Ricardo Klement was none other than Adolf Eichmann. That same night, he sent the key message to Tel Aviv: "The driver is in black." Isser Harel acted immediately and appointed Rafi Eitan as leader of the operation. On the 20th of March, from a van, Aharoni observed Eichmann up close. He wore glasses, was bald, and had a distinctive nose. There was no margin for error. That night, an unexpected event almost ruined everything. One of the vehicles fell into a ditch and attracted the attention of neighbors. Although Eichmann did not witness the incident, the team had to withdraw cautiously. In the following days, Aharoni investigated the target's sons and confirmed that the German government knew his whereabouts but had no plans to intervene. On the 3rd of April, he managed to obtain clear photographs of Eichmann with his son, which sealed the confirmation. He then traveled to Paris and from there flew to Tel Aviv. During the return flight, he sat next to Isser Harel. The closure of the operation had begun. With the order, "We're going for Eichmann," the final phase was activated. New agents joined: Shalom Dani, an expert in forgery; Tabor, a technician in locks and electronics; Jacob Gatt, a veteran with extensive field experience; and Ephraim Ilani, valuable for his fluency in Spanish and knowledge of Buenos Aires. Aharoni, meanwhile, delivered the photos for biometric analysis. The result was conclusive. The left ear matched completely. The identity was practically confirmed. Although they were aware that the capture would violate Argentine sovereignty, they had no intention of backing down. To avoid compromising Israel, each agent would travel separately and under false identities. Peter Malkin, assigned to carry out the arrest, felt strengthened knowing that Isser would be in Buenos Aires and that Rafi Eitan would coordinate all logistics. They evaluated 3 different methods of capture, and Malkin began an intense physical training regimen to act with precision and without margin for error. On the 24th of April of 1960, Jacob Gatt landed in Buenos Aires. He was impeccably dressed, and as he got off the plane, a street photographer took a snapshot without asking for permission. Gatt feared it was an ambush, but reacted naturally. He paid for the photo and walked away. To avoid leaving traces, he avoided taxis and opted for a bus that took him to the city center, where Ephraim Ilani was waiting for him. Ilani had already been installed for several days in a rented apartment, observing Eichmann's daily routine. Shortly afterward, Aharoni joined them, now completely unrecognizable thanks to his new look with a mustache and longer hair. Only one crucial team member remained to be incorporated: Abraham Shalom. Shalom had arrived following a complicated route that included Rome, Paris, and Lisbon using false documents. He made several mistakes along the way. He forgot to mention his alias. He ended up on the same flight as Medad, something strictly prohibited. And upon arrival, he discovered that the hotel receptionist was from Hamburg, just like his fictitious identity. Facing that risk, he decided to change accommodations. Once reunited with Aharoni and Gatt, the trio decided to surveil Eichmann's house. That same night, they saw him walking briskly toward his home. Gatt followed him from a distance until confirming he entered the previously identified residence. The next day, Shalom sent the signal to Tel Aviv, "Carrot." With that message, Isser Harel gave the order to proceed. The extraction flight was scheduled for the 11th of May. Medad was responsible for locating suitable properties that met all necessary conditions. Finally, they established an operational base named Mao, from which they coordinated the final details. Meanwhile, in New York, Joseph Klein, director of El Al, and Luba Folk, former embassy secretary, were informed of their participation in the mission. Both traveled to Buenos Aires. Klein did not fully understand his role, but followed the order. Folk sensed there was more than she was told, but chose not to inquire. On the 11th of May of 1960, the Mossad team woke up knowing that the decisive moment would come that day. Tabor and Peter Malkin conducted one final inspection of the safe house, while Shalom, Gatt, and Rafi Eitan reviewed the escape routes. Aharoni went out early in search of a new battery for the Buick they would use in the operation. At the Tira house, the tension was masked with card games and chess. Malkin tried to rest, but couldn't stop thinking about the imminent capture. Finally, he got ready. He put on a wig, dressed in simple clothes, and adopted a neutral expression. He was ready to intercept Eichmann. Before leaving, Eitan reviewed the plan one more time. Only Malkin and Tabor would be in disguise and would carry out the arrest, while the rest of the team would provide backup. Everything had to be resolved in a matter of seconds, with no room for error. Meanwhile, Eichmann maintained his usual routine, showing no signs of suspicion. He worked at the Mercedes-Benz plant, briefly attended a union meeting, and then took the bus home, as he did every day. At 7:30 in the evening, the operations vehicles positioned themselves strategically in the area. The Buick parked carefully on Garibaldi Street. Malkin and Tabor pretended the car had a mechanical failure, raised the hood, and waited. A curious boy approached, but they quickly got him to leave. However, doubts began to arise. Bus number 203 was not appearing. 2 buses passed without stopping. Tension rose within the team. Had Eichmann been warned? Had he changed his routine? Despite the uncertainty, Eitan decided to maintain surveillance and continue waiting. At 8:05 in the evening, the bus finally stopped. Eichmann got off without showing the slightest suspicion. He walked calmly, one hand in his pocket, while Zvi Aharoni observed him from a distance. There was no doubt it was him. However, that hand in the pocket caused some concern. He feared Eichmann might be armed. At that moment, Malkin stepped forward decisively, quickly closing the distance. Eichmann, sensing his presence, took a step back. The confrontation was immediate. During the struggle, both fell to the ground. Eichmann shouted, but had no time to react. Then Tabor appeared from behind and grabbed him by the legs. In a matter of seconds, they managed to restrain him and dragged him into the vehicle. Inside the Buick, the process was swift. They tied his hands and feet, blindfolded him, and covered him with a blanket. He carried no weapon, only a flashlight in his pocket. For a moment, absolute silence reigned. Then, in a low voice and almost without emotion, Eichmann broke the silence. He asked no questions and offered no resistance. He simply said, "That is called destiny." He knew. He was resigned. The vehicle took alternate routes with diplomatic plates, avoiding traffic without attracting attention. Throughout the entire ride, Eichmann remained silent. At 8:55, they passed through the gate of the Tira house. The mission was complete. Adolf Eichmann, one of the most wanted war criminals of the century, was no longer free. For the first time, he was in the custody of the Jewish people. After the capture, he was taken in handcuffs to the safe house, silently escorted by Shalom and Malkin. Only Aharoni was authorized to interrogate him. In the room, Eichmann stood silently, covered in mud, saying nothing. He wore dark glasses and his hands trembled. Dr. Kaplan immediately examined him for cyanide capsules. He removed his dentures and thoroughly inspected his body. The scars matched Mossad records, although the SS tattoo had been removed. At 9:15, Aharoni began the interrogation. Eichmann responded calmly, saying his name was Ricardo Klement, but when asked about his real identity, he replied without hesitation, "Adolf Eichmann." He then asked for a glass of wine to calm himself, which was granted. He attempted to recite a prayer in Hebrew, but Aharoni indignantly interrupted him. The conversation focused on verifying details of his past. Eichmann denied nothing and answered coldly and without hesitation. At the end, Eitan ordered an immediate report to be sent to Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, Aharoni and Shalom left the Buick in a parking lot, and Tabor erased all traces and removed the fake plates. In a nearby cafe, Harrell met with the team and confirmed the success of the operation. There were no celebrations. Harrell simply asked, "How do we get him out now?" That night, they organized shifts to watch him. Eichmann was handcuffed to the bed under constant light and surveillance. He did not eat or sleep, remaining nervous and silent. Eitan slept in the adjacent room with a plan ready for any eventuality. Tabor knew what to do if anything went wrong. After a sleepless night, on the morning of the 12th of May, Jacob Gatt helped Eichmann sit on the bed. He remained blindfolded with one ankle chained to the bedpost. Shortly after, Aharoni arrived, sat in front of him, opened his notebook and resumed the interrogation. He asked why the night before he had identified himself as Otto Henninger. Eichmann explained that it was a name he had used for years while working as a lumberjack in Germany before arriving in Argentina. Without resistance, he recounted his escape after the war, his last meeting with Kaltenbrunner, his passage through the Alps, his capture by the Americans, and subsequent escape from Europe. He proudly described how he had evaded his pursuers without showing remorse. Aharoni, skeptical, asked why his family did not use the surname Klement. Eichmann replied with disdain, he could not ask them to live under a lie. When questioned about other Nazis, he denied knowing the whereabouts of Mengele or Bormann and claimed to have had no recent contact with those who helped him forge documents to escape. That was a long time ago. About his wife, he said she would be frightened and not understand what was happening. Of his sons, Nick and Dieter, he believed they would eventually realize the seriousness of the situation, but did not think they would report anything. Regarding other Nazi fugitives, he believed they would prefer to stay on the sidelines, concerned only with their own safety. Finally, Aharoni was direct and asked if he was willing to stand trial in Israel. Eichmann responded without hesitation, "No, I have done nothing wrong. I was only following orders. If I am to be judged, it should be in Germany or in Argentina. I have no connection whatsoever with Israel." Aharoni looked at him in disbelief. Eichmann only added that he would think about it. Meanwhile, Eichmann's sons were beginning to notice his absence. Dieter exclaimed with concern, "The old man is gone." Together they searched the city for answers, including at the house of Carlos Fuldner. They suspected that Eichmann might have had an accident or been arrested. They checked hospitals, police stations, and his workplace until they finally found his broken glasses buried in the mud, exactly where he had been captured. Elsewhere in the city, Harel and Joseph Klein discussed possible ways to get Eichmann out of the country. The safest option turned out to be transporting him in a sealed box as diplomatic luggage to be loaded onto a catering cart directly to the plane. The flight crew had already been selected, though only the pilot knew the true nature of the mission. At the Tira house, Eichmann followed all orders, even asking for permission to go to the bathroom. During an exercise in the yard, he asked if they were going to execute him by firing squad. The agents looked at him with contempt, not for his crimes, but for the miserable figure he had become. That day, Judith Nessiau arrived to help with household tasks. Although she was initially willing upon seeing him, she confessed that the idea of cooking for him made her stomach turn, and she felt disgusted touching anything he had touched. In the early hours of the 13th of May, Malkin, on guard duty, passed the time drawing on a map of Argentina. He depicted Eichmann with a weapon next to Hitler, Mussolini, Eichmann's parents, and his sister Fruma. At dawn, the prisoner was shaved, fed, and kept under strict surveillance. At the same time, local radios and newspapers were monitored, but there was no news about Ricardo Klement or signs of a disappearance. Later, the encrypted message reached Israel that triggered the official chain. Karot informed Golda Meir, who received the news with surprise. In Sderboka, Ben-Gurion was notified that Eichmann had been identified without a doubt. That night, he wrote in his diary that if everything was confirmed, it would be one of the most important operations Israel had ever carried out. On the 18th of May of 1960, the Israeli delegation boarded the Britannia at Lod Airport. Officially, the flight was to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Argentina's independence, but unofficially it carried precise orders to retrieve Adolf Eichmann. Among the passengers were Abba Ibn, head of the delegation, and officers such as General Meyer Zoria. Most of the crew was unaware of the true mission, although some began to suspect upon seeing unfamiliar faces in uniform. Meanwhile, Issa Harel remained obsessed with another name, Joseph Mengele. An emissary attempted to contact him in a store linked to his circle but was turned away. The city, under heavy police control due to recent attacks, made any secret movement difficult. In another part of Buenos Aires, Eichmann's sons, Nick and Dieter, burst into a synagogue looking for clues. Their desperation was growing. Although they considered extreme actions, such as kidnapping an Israeli diplomat, they eventually dismissed those ideas and continued searching on their own. In the early morning of the 19th of May, Malkin once again confronted Eichmann and spoke to him directly about his role in the final solution. Eichmann insisted he had not killed anyone, he had only organized transports. Calmly, Malkin offered him wine and cigarettes and got him to voluntarily sign a statement. Eichmann agreed and wrote his full name in his own hand. When Mossad found out, he reacted with fury, accusing them of celebrating a murderer. However, Eitan downplayed the situation and congratulated Malkin for obtaining the confession. At 7 in the morning, the Britannia landed in Recife. Eichmann would be transported disguised in an Israeli Airlines uniform, and the return flight would make no stops until Dakar. That night, in Maus, the team met to review every detail, fake documents, escape routes, and disguises. The plan for maritime extraction was discarded, and all attention focused on the airport departure. Meanwhile, at the Tira house, tension grew. A false alarm forced the team to erase any trace of his presence. No one could sleep. Eichmann seemed to sense that something was happening. He remained silent and awake. Finally, at dawn on the 20th of May, everything was ready. Only one step remained: transferring Eichmann to the airport and getting him out of the country. The Tira house remained quiet, but every movement of the team was part of a precise choreography, with no room for error. Eichmann, still under sedation, had to be moved in the following hours. Aharoni, dressed as a diplomatic driver, retrieved a Chevrolet from the embassy. He carried forged documents, including a passport and international license. Before departure, the vehicle was thoroughly inspected. At the same time, Shalom Dani reviewed the prisoner's documentation, which included a medical certificate stating a mild contusion and declaring Eichmann fit to travel. The passport was in the name of Sicroni. At the airport, Tabor inspected the Britannia and oversaw the construction of a false wall in the first-class bathroom, which would serve as a hiding place if something went wrong. Shalom confirmed that the usual guards were still in position and that there were no new checkpoints along the route. Harel, stationed at a nearby restaurant, coordinated everything without raising suspicion, surrounded by police officers and soldiers eating, unaware of what was about to happen that night. The unit made one last attempt to find Joseph Mengele. They went to a house in Vicente Lopez, but found only a foreign tenant. Mengele was no longer there. The news was a disappointment for Harel. At 7:30 in the evening, in a discreet house in San Fernando, the awaited signal arrived. Everything was underway. Malkin approached Eichmann and began his transformation. He dyed his hair, applied makeup to his face, put on a fake mustache, and dressed him in an Israeli airline uniform. Eichmann did not resist or speak. He only showed an empty, resigned gaze. In the kitchen, Kaplan prepared the sedative. Eichmann murmured that he didn't need it, but ended up accepting it, aware that there was no escape. Shortly afterward, he was placed in the back seat of the Chevrolet, with the doctor watching his every move. Aharoni drove. Goran was in the front passenger seat, and another vehicle with Eitan and Tabor followed closely in case of any problems. Malkin and Netanyahu remained in reserve, ready to abort the operation if necessary. As the convoy advanced in a nearby hotel, Captain Wedderlis gathered the crew. The instructions were clear. They would transport a high-ranking diplomat, would board from the maintenance zone, and should not ask questions. At 11 o'clock sharp, the convoy arrived at the airport. Harrell intercepted the doctor for a final check. Eichmann was still conscious but completely neutralized. The guards at the entrance recognized Shalom and allowed them to pass without issue. The group reached the plane. A patrolling police officer forced them to improvise. Aitan distracted him while Goran and Gat carried the prisoner, hidden under a blanket. They placed him in first class. No one spoke or moved. Every second was vital. But then a new obstacle appeared in the terminal. Customs procedures were taking too long. Harrell, growing impatient, was about to order the plane to take off without clearance when, just in time, an official stamped the documents. It was a momentary relief. However, minutes later, the control tower halted the takeoff due to an irregularity in the flight plan. A signature was missing, and no alternate airport had been designated. The issue was resolved quickly. Finally, at 12:05 in the early morning of the 21st of May, the Britannia took off bound for Dakar, leaving behind 16 years of hiding, a life in the shadows, and a country that never knew Eichmann's true identity. 30 minutes later, Nick Eichmann received the news that an Israeli plane had departed for Recife and suspected what had happened. He activated his contacts in Brazil in a desperate attempt to stop the flight, but it was too late. The plane was crossing the Atlantic, and his father was headed directly toward justice. When the Britannia exited Argentine airspace, the tension eased for the first time. It was then that Pellick revealed the prisoner's true identity to the crew, Adolf Eichmann. The news shocked everyone, especially a stewardess who had been by his side without suspecting a thing. In the cockpit, there were no celebrations. The flight to Dakar would be long, and due to the plane's weight and low altitude, fuel consumption was high. Eichmann, sedated and monitored, remained motionless. There was constant fear that he might try to commit suicide. In a moment of silence, Ari Friedman, a team member and Holocaust survivor, expressed his pent-up anger, painfully remembering that Eichmann had been one of the main architects of that tragedy. As the Britannia crossed the Atlantic, the remaining agents in Buenos Aires erased all evidence. They returned the vehicles, wiped fingerprints, and left the city by train headed for Chile. Only then did Harrell assure them that the operation would remain a secret until everyone was out of danger. After 13 hours and 10 minutes of flight, and with fuel nearly depleted, the Britannia landed in Dakar. Before arriving, the doctor administered another dose of sedative to Eichmann to prevent problems during the inspection, which was successful. The Senegalese inspectors detected nothing. They presented a false itinerary with a stopover in Rome, but the real plan was even bolder: fly directly to Tel Aviv. Harrell ordered the crew to avoid the North African coast. The Britannia flew over West Africa, crossed Spain and Greece, and stayed away from Egypt to avoid enemy radar. Shortly before landing, Harrell shaved and changed clothes. At 6:55 in the morning on the 22nd of May, the Britannia touched down on Israeli soil. There was no applause, only solemn silence. However, at the airport, one unforeseen detail triggered Harrell's anger. No one had arranged for how to transport the prisoner. Without delay, he called the Shimbet. A black vehicle transported Eichmann to a detention center in Jaffa. Not even the guards knew whom they were guarding. Hours later, Harrell appeared before Ben Gurion in Jerusalem and bluntly announced that Adolf Eichmann was now on Israeli soil. The Prime Minister ordered that his identity be verified, and 2 agents confirmed it officially that same afternoon. Ben Gurion did not wait any longer and ordered the news to be made public. The following day, on the 23rd of May, Adolf Eichmann was brought before Judge Emanuel Halevi. In court, he identified himself by his real name and was formally charged with crimes against the Jewish people and humanity. The news also reached Fritz Bauer, the German prosecutor who had driven the search. Upon confirmation, he could not hold back tears, aware that justice was finally underway. After his arrival in Israel, Eichmann was taken to a maximum security facility near Haifa. Camp Aya, a former military base, had been adapted to keep him in complete isolation. Only a small group of agents had access, and every movement and contact was strictly monitored. The guards selected had no personal ties to Holocaust victims, and the directive was clear: prevent any act of revenge or mistreatment. Even his meals were inspected before delivery. Nothing was left to chance. On the 29th of May 1960, the official interrogation began. The capture of Adolf Eichmann was announced with great media impact, accompanied by extensive press coverage. Special emphasis was placed on the collaboration of Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal and the role of the Zionist cause, aiming to obscure and justify the unconventional and secret intervention of the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, in the abduction operation carried out on foreign soil. Once transferred to Jerusalem, Eichmann faced a historic trial that marked a turning point in the judicial history of the State of Israel. The court that tried him was composed of three prominent judges: Moshe Landau, Benjamin Halevi, and Yitzhak Rava. To defend him, Eichmann had attorney Robert Servatius, known at the time for his experience in international cases. During the trial, Eichmann was thoroughly questioned by Israeli intelligence officers and prosecutors. In his statement, he recounted aspects of his life before the outbreak of the Second World War, his entry into the Schutzstaffel, SS, the Nazi paramilitary organization, and his role within the bureaucratic machinery that implemented the final solution. However, in an attempt to deny direct responsibility, he argued that all his actions were carried out under superior orders, pointing to figures such as Heinrich Himmler, Odilo Globokschnik, and Ernst Kaltenbrunner as those who dictated the policies he was bound to follow. He insisted that he was neither an ideologue nor a promoter of the Holocaust, but merely a functionary fulfilling his administrative duties without personal hatred toward Jews. Despite his defense, the court concluded that Eichmann was guilty of crimes against humanity due to his central role in organizing and executing the genocide. On the 15th of December 1961, after a lengthy judicial process, the death sentence was handed down by hanging, marking the first and only time Israel applied the death penalty in a public trial. This case is considered emblematic, symbolizing the pursuit of justice for Holocaust victims and Israel's commitment to punishing war criminals. The sentence was carried out in the early hours of the 1st of June 1962 at Ramla prison. Before his execution, Eichmann delivered final words reflecting his personal outlook. He expressed allegiance to Germany, Austria, and Argentina, the three countries he considered closest to himself and claimed he would never forget. He reiterated that he had merely obeyed the laws of war and the orders of his flag, avoiding any admission of moral responsibility for his actions. After his death, his body was cremated and the ashes scattered over the Mediterranean Sea from an Israeli naval vessel in the presence of several Holocaust survivors. This decision was carefully planned to prevent his burial site from becoming a place of worship or pilgrimage for neo-Nazi sympathizers and extremists. The capture and subsequent trial of Eichmann had an immediate effect on the fugitive Nazi community in Latin America. Nazis like Josef Mengele and Franz Stangl, who were residing in countries such as Argentina and Brazil, took extreme precautions and chose to disappear even further from public view, fearing they too would be tracked and captured by international agencies like the Mossad.